welcome to this webinar on the Hymnal Anthem book. This is the second of our series led by the Deborah Carlton Loftus Ambassadors of the Center for Congregational Song. These ambassadors normally would be going out on our behalf and teaching workshops specifically designed for students, but because of COVID, we've had to pivot to a webinar series, and so now everyone gets to enjoy these workshops. Before we begin, I just want to say thanks to all of our donors who make these types of opportunities free and available to the public. And if you want to donate to the Hymn Society, you can go to www.thehymnsociety.org and support our work there. Megan Mash is our leader today, and Megan did her MSM, Master's in Sacred Music, at Perkins School of Theology, which is where we met. Since then, she has been working as a church musician, a music minister at Sebastian United Methodist Church, which is in Southeast Florida, where she does a lot of work that church musicians do, a little bit of everything, and she does it really well. One of the unique parts of her job is that her choir is full of snowbirds, and so she might have a big choir at one moment and then a tiny choir at another, depending on the season. Megan is now pursuing her doctorate in pastoral music at SMU with Michael Hahn. And so we're excited to hear from Megan today about the Hymnal Anthem book. We had a couple of technical errors right at the beginning, and so we lost the recording until about 2 or 3 minutes in. And so what she was talking about at the very beginning is why we would use the hymnal as a anthem book for our choir. And the answer is that it's full of beautiful texts and tunes that the church needs to know and that we can learn from and that we can use as a way to disciple our folks. And so she was talking about that, and she was talking about the importance of enabling worship through this work, that the choir's job is to enable worship. So we stretch our choirs by choosing difficult anthems sometimes, and sometimes we pull back and we choose something that's very accessible to make sure that we're always enabling worship to happen and not pushing too far and too hard so that our choirs fail and then worship kind of falters. So there's that delicate balance, and that's where we pick up with the recording, and we're so grateful that Megan led us and is leading us today.
Cause the situation when we select too many anthems or too many anthems that are too difficult. And we want to pick difficult anthems to push our choir, but we also want to find a balance of anthems that are difficult, but some that are easier, that don't take as much effort and energy. And by doing that, we further enable our choir members to worship. We also enable our parishioners to worship when they can hear some things that are familiar to them, or aren't having to listen to some things that are stretching them outside their musical zone all the time. Again, we want to push that envelope, but we got to create that balance. Budget. Let's face it, most churches are low on money, especially now with coronavirus. A lot of people are struggling in those areas. And creating a sound, fiscally responsible budget is important. You cannot purchase a new anthem every week, even if you wanted to. I have some colleagues in my area who can't really even purchase 2 or 3 anthems a year. That's stretching it too much for them. And so by using the hymnal as a source for anthems, that stretches our budget because you already have a hymnal. You don't have to go buy it. And everything that we're going to talk about on how to create these is free. It's things that you already have. And finance committees like to hear those kinds of things. A third reason you'd want to do this is for during the summer or the beginning of a new season. As I mentioned earlier, I live in Florida and I work with a lot of retired people, which means that we have snowbirds, and it means they have the flexibility to travel at the drop of a hat. A lot of them have family members that live throughout the country because you come to Florida retire because it's warm here and you don't have to deal with snow. And so they say, oh, it's January. I'm going to go and be gone for a month. And so how do you deal with that with your choir when you don't quite know who you're going to have or when you're going to have them? Or during the summer, we do a summer choir. And it's a great opportunity for people who don't want to commit to singing year round for whatever reason, or for people to try out the choir. And so creating some of these anthems with your hymnal that can be really flexible can provide opportunities for you to really have no idea who you're going to have for a y'all come sing Sunday morning summer choir anthem. Or again, as a great way to kick off the season with something that your choir can put together very quickly in their first rehearsal. So that way your first rehearsal back for the season, whether it's the new season or in January, you can be working on some of the harder things you have coming up in addition to the one anthem for that coming Sunday with this kind of rehearsal. All right. Teaching, the fourth reason I have on here is to teach. Throughout my graduate studies and from attending various hymn society conferences, I have come to believe that congregations can sing anything if they're able to do so. The problem with congregations learning new songs are not rooted in the songs or the congregation, but those leading and enlivening the songs. One way we can teach congregations new songs is by using the choir. Selecting a hymn that is unfamiliar and then having the choir sing it as an anthem can be the first step in introducing that hymn to the congregation. Well, as I said earlier, one of the most valuable things I learned from Michael Hahn is that the congregation doesn't have to sing everything. Hymns that have a refrain can sometimes be easier to teach a congregation. You can teach them the refrain, and now they've got a new song to sing. You can use the choir then to lead the verses, and you could use this as an anthem format. I mean, we buy these anthems that have choir and congregation, so why not just make our own and instead of having to buy it as a tool to teach. And you could, have the congregation then come in on like the last refrain or something like that. The fifth reason I have on here is natural disasters or emergencies or a late notice. So all of these kind of, I feel like, live in the same place here. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up outside of Kansas City. So when I moved to Florida 10 years ago, I got to experience this new thing called hurricane season, which was really not a big deal when I watched it on the news from far away. But to actually live and breathe it is a whole new thing. For any of you who are in those areas, you know what that is like. And when we experienced Hurricane Matthew about 5 or 6 years ago, we lost several rehearsals. I think we lost 3 by the time we did the preparation before the storm, to having the storm, and being without power, and the cleanup from the storm. And we got power back fairly recently at church, but people weren't ready because they didn't have power at their houses or whatnot to be back to like regular life routines. But the choir still wanted to sing on Sunday morning. So what did we do? I changed courses for our plan, and we created some anthems out of hymns because they have a hymnal. And in that instance, I picked things that were familiar to them. So they already knew the basics of it, the melody, and sometimes the parts, the harmonies that are printed in the hymnal. And it makes it so much easier. And they needed to feel this community after that emergency, natural disaster experience. Sometimes there are other emergency things that happen, like sometimes with like mass shootings. We experienced that. We did a prayer service after the shooting at Pulse in Orlando that provided us with an opportunity that the choir wants to sing. They want to share music. That's what they do. And the congregation wants to hear them singing. And we needed to do something fast. So we didn't have weeks and weeks and weeks to put together this really beautiful anthem on how to talk about peace, but we could use the hymnal and talk about "Let there be peace on earth," or "O day of peace that dimly shines," and create these lovely pieces that are right there at our fingertips to be able to put together. You could, I haven't used it myself, but I would also venture to say that you could use this for a funeral. If you had somebody who had a specific hymn that they wanted sung by a choir at a funeral, and we all know that those things happen really quickly and are all of a sudden upon us, that you could use this technique for that as well. There really is no limit to that. The next thing is musicianship. I once heard a church musician who said that church choirs have no business singing a cappella. I completely disagree with that. As a full supporter of a cappella Sunday, if you want to know more about that, ask Brian. He'll tell you all about it. Or you can ask me. I'm happy to talk about it. And it's hard. Like I knew where he was coming from. Singing a cappella is not easy. And there's this anxiety that our church choirs have about singing a cappella. I remember shortly after I had started working here, I had said, okay, we're going to sing this a cappella. And like, I could just feel the tension in the room rising. And part of it was because we were doing something, like we had been practicing it, but it wasn't something that they knew. That was like part of their lifeblood. And that is so important, because when you take those things, then they feel a lot more enabled. The first time I had my congregation sing the refrain to "Great is Thy Faithfulness" a cappella, they didn't even miss a beat because it was "Great is Thy Faithfulness." And I didn't tell them I was going to do it. And I think they were all kind of like, oh, well, I think the organ might be broken, but we're just going to keep on singing because this is part of who we are. And so you can use this technique of creating anthems out of hymns to enhance the musicianship in your choir, to get them used to singing a cappella. Start with something that is part that they know really well, and start to break them into those molds so they can become more comfortable with it. So then when you say, oh, well, let's do this a cappella, they're like, okay, no big deal. We can do that. Or, we know that we're going to go through the steps to be prepared to be able to do that. Yes, because I'm reading through my notes. Because obviously, if your choir's not used to singing a cappella, if you tried to throw something complicated at them, that this fancy Renaissance motet that you really want to have done a cappella, they're gonna have some resistance to that, as is rightfully so. I mean, I would argue the first time any of us did some of those things, that we experienced that same kind of anxiety. And anytime we can get our choir to be less reliant on the accompaniment and more reliant on themselves and listening to each other, is just going to benefit our choirs in the long run and make them better singers. And lastly on my list here is creativity. I'm not a composer. I remember when I was in undergrad and for theory had to do a short composition to show that I learned how all these theory practices worked, and I was terrified. And honestly, my composition was really terrible. It followed all the rules, but as an actual really piece of music, it was really boring. And that just kind of intimidates me. And some people are great composers, and that's fantastic. One of my friends is, and but that's not a gift that I have. But I do feel like a gift that I have is to do some arranging. And that's really what we're doing here with these anthems and the hymn book, is you're just really arranging. You're taking what's already written there and making it into something else. And as we kind of talk about some of the steps to go about this, feel free to explore. I mean, I can tell you, I've done things with my choir. I said, in preparing it, I've listened and I said, okay, we're going to do this. I think this will work really well. And then I had them actually sing it, and it didn't really work. For whatever reason. It might just be because of the people I actually had in the room. It might be because it just really wasn't going to work. And we pivoted. But that creativity there is really a really great thing. And it's easy to add an instrument or allow for solo parts. I've got some recordings of some things that my choir's done recently that we'll listen to, and you'll hear a variety of instruments. You'll hear some soloists. It can be a great way to have that child that you want to give an opportunity to sing a solo be a part of something different, because these anthems out of the hymn book, using the hymnal as your anthem book, can be things that you've planned out, that you're intentionally scheduling for this Sunday or that Sunday. They don't have to be things for, last minute or just during the summer. The other thing is some of the ways you start thinking about these hymns for anthems. I want to also encourage you to think about them as also ways in the future that you could sing them as the hymn, like do that variety of things as the actual congregational hymn. Because I feel like this creativity for the choir versus the congregation with these can be really blurred at times. So how do we do this? And so before I launch into exactly the process that I follow, I don't want to start the process that I follow, because you can do all kinds of things. We're going to ask a couple poll questions here to help you start thinking about who you have, who you're working with, because that's really what this is rooted in. Because the way I plan these when I use them during the summer versus if I do it during some time of the year, I think about some different things because I already know that my personnel has changed. So the first question here we've got is, how many people are in your choir? And Brian's going to pop that poll question up for you. That's 79%, 82%. Looking like most people are falling in that 10 to 20 range. Nice. All right. So most of you are somewhere between 0 and 20. We got one person from 40 to 75, which is great. I would love to have that many people sometimes. Okay, so the next question I have for you is, what parts are present in your choir? And again, there are no wrong answers. This is just to get you thinking about who you have. Got 3/4, 80%. Looks like a good majority of you have some kind of harmony you can sing, which is fantastic. Or at least you feel comfortable asking your people to sing. And for me, during the summer, mine's mostly altos, actually, which wasn't one of those specific options we gave you. Mostly altos. A lot of my sopranos are snowbirds, so they're not here during the summer. And like many of you, I'm sure, the amount of men that are actually, or tenors or basses, people who sing those parts, are sparse in my choir, especially during. Well, actually, I take that back. All of my basses and tenors are here year round. Actually, I at least have that going for me. But that changes how you're going to think about these things, about what's available to you. So I might throw out some ideas and you can say, oh, well, that wouldn't work for me because my choir is an SAB choir, so I couldn't do an SATB split. That's fine. A lot of these things are flexible enough where you could say, well, I'm just going to leave that out. And go from there. Or like the canons, and we're going to look about some canons. And most of my canons for these I've split between high voices and low voices. But maybe you say, well, that's not an even split for me, balance wise. And so instead of doing that, you can on the spot say 1, 2, 3, 4, you're on the first part, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're on the second part. And it'll still work. Okay, last question to help your creative mind start thinking. What other musical skills are present in your congregation? Nice variety going on there. Good. Okay. And you know your people and you know what level they're at. I have some flute players who, if I needed to do something last minute, I can say, hey, on Wednesday, we're going to do this anthem on Sunday, and I need you to play this, and they could do it easily. I have some brass players that would be really hard for them. That doesn't mean we can't utilize them. It just means that depending on what time frame we're looking at might change whether we can for that specific piece or not. Handbells are great, and I'll try not to go off on my handbell tangent because I love handbells. They're one of my favorite things. And there's so many things you can do with handbells that don't require any rehearsal. The singing bell technique, which you'll hear in one of these things, is a great thing that you can add on Sunday morning. I can't tell you, when we were in person, how often I would go to my handbell Facebook page and be like, I need 5 people for singing bell on Thursday. And it's nothing that requires any practice for them. Or you can do simple bell peals or some ostinato patterns using those that are easy to put together pretty quickly. So, before we start talking about some more specifics, I want to recommend, which is backwards here, Creative Hymn Singing by Alice Parker. Some of the ideas I've got come directly from this book that Alice Parker put together. And she covers 23 hymns. She calls them improvised hymn anthems is what she calls them, which is really what we're doing. And it's organized by historical period. She talks about melody, rhythm, and text stresses, as well as different ways that you can use these for both choir and congregation. And some of these are familiar hymns. Some of them are familiar tunes that you would sing multiple things to. Some of that, like there's an arrangement here for Old 100s. So some things that you can put a bunch of different text to, and you may want to use some of the ideas that she has after you've looked at your text. One piece that she does highlight in here that I'll just talk about specifically because I find it interesting is A Mighty Fortress is Our God. And if you were to do that as a hymn anthem, You could have maybe the choir sing the first stanza with the original rhythm. It's a little hard for our congregations to do just on the spot. You'd have to work to teach them for it, but your choir could learn that a lot faster, and tell them about that and tell them that that's what you're doing, and they can experience that, because it changes the stresses and how it works. So you can see how this book is set up. She provides you with the text on one side, and then she talks about some ways, some ideas to do it, and then always has the music printed in this book. So, creative hymn singing, Alice Parker. Okay, so my process, when I do these, what do I do when I've decided it? So there's two important things to look at when you're going to put these together: the text and the music. What makes up your hymn? Your text and your music. I tend to kind of look at these simultaneously, and make notes about what I'm seeing in each part of them to decide what might work and what might not work. And thinking about them together can change the decisions that I'm going to make, because there's sometimes things I might do because of the music, but the text doesn't really lend itself to that. So the text, when I'm looking at the text, I look at one of the first things I look at is who is talking? Who is talking, and does the person talking change? For the example I listed there in your handout is "Here I am, Lord." So in "Here I am, Lord," if it's a text that's unfamiliar to you, the verse is God talking. "I, the Lord of sea and sky, I have heard my people cry. Who will bear the light to them? Whom shall I send?" And then we get to the refrain, and the person talking changes. The pronouns don't, but the person talking changed. "Here I am, Lord." Is it "I, Lord"? Okay, so that's going to affect how many use this as an anthem. If I've got God talking, and then I have people talking. Or another example of that is the summons. You get that same kind of thing happening in that text. In your handout, I'll skip around a little bit so you can see these things work together. In your handout, you have the friendly beasts. I've done this for a lessons and carol service, because what we've started doing at my church, just to give you a little bit of context, is the Sunday after Christmas, we do a Christmas lessons and carol service. So then the pastor doesn't have to worry about preaching, because it's been a long season. And all anybody wants to do is sing Christmas carols. And they haven't got to do it a lot in church, because we sing Advent carols during Advent. And so this provides them with an opportunity to sing all the Christmas carols. And it's a lot for the congregation to sing all the Christmas carols for like an hour, even though some of them might want to do that. And so I use the Friendly Beasts as an anthem to feature some soloists. And so the first, I think the handout has 6 stanzas. So what I would do with this one is, for the first stanza, Jesus, our brother. So there's multiple people talking about Jesus. Oh yeah, look, Brian's gonna share this, yay. So Jesus, our brother. And who is this "our" that's talking? Well, we can interpret that in a bunch of different ways. In this text for the anthem, I'm interpreting it as the people, the animals that are in the stable. So then I would have 4 soloists, a donkey, a cow, a sheep, and a dove. And so they would be the small group for the first one. And then they'd each get their solo verse for 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then when we get to the end, "Thus all beasts by some good spell," well, they're not talking about themselves really so much anymore. Okay? We're glad to tell of the gifts that they gave. They're not saying that the gifts that we gave, the gifts that they gave. So then you can add the congregation in for the 6th stanza. because this is now the culmination of the story from the outsider looking in at the gifts that they gave. So in this instance, the text is really driving what I would do for this. Sometimes it works other ways. So who's talking? That's an important first question to ask. Are there natural breaks in the text? And there are. Really, where are they? Sorry, I need to read my question right. Where are the natural breaks in the text? Sometimes it's different from stanza to stanza. Sometimes it's the same, depending on, it just depends. And you want to find where those are. Is your hymn starting out asking a question every time? Does it ask a question and then provide an answer to it? Because then you can use that in the middle of the stanza. You could have one part ask the question, have your sopranos and altos ask the questions, and then your basses and tenors respond to the question, or vice versa. So the text can really lead you a lot to some of these things that you want to do. Does the text repeat? Okay, so let's look at Come Christians Join to Sing. Because this has a lot of repetitive text in it. And again, here, these are just an ideas of what you can do. But this is one of the things I like. Does the text repeat? How do I want to mimic? How do I want to represent that repeated text? So in Come Christians Join to Sing, we get this repeated Alleluia, Amen. At the end of the first line, the second line, and then at the end, we get a longer line there before the end of each stanza on how this is written out in the hymnal. And so you could treat it like that question and answer kind of thing, where you can have the high voices sing the Alleluia, Amen for the first stanza, and have the low voices sing the rest of the text. So basses and tenors, come, Christians join to sing, sopranos and altos, Alleluia, Amen. And that back and forth. And then you could reverse it for the next stanza. So the high voices, come, lift your heart on high. And the basses and tenors respond, Alleluia, Amen. So you have this conversation that is happening in the text that is then happening with your choir. And you could even get really creative. And instead of having, I don't know how everybody's sanctuaries are set up differently. Instead of having them all up front in their chancellery or whatever, because that's where my choir normally is up front, you could spread them out. You could have them stand on the sides of the sanctuary, so then they're really talking across. And it's all of these creative things. You could have them stand front and back. And again, those are a lot of things that are you would do uniquely to your space. Then when you get to the third stanza, you can have this conversation change between parts of the choir to the congregation and the choir. So you can have the choir sing, praise yet the Lord again, and then have the congregation join in with the Alleluia, Amens. And so that kind of just gradual building of this piece. That also involves your congregation. So that would be something to do with text that repeats. Okay. All right, next, is there a refrain? I kind of mentioned and touched on some refrain ideas earlier. Refrains are hymns that have refrains, I have found, really enable a congregation to learn new hymns quickly that they can really participate in, because it's the same text with the same music that happens every time, and that repetition makes a huge difference. And so when you're putting together an anthem using a text that has a refrain, how do you want to handle that refrain? Do you want to do the same thing every time the refrain comes back? Do you want to let the congregation join on the last refrain, or maybe all of them? Do you want to change what's happening on the refrain based on what's happening, what the text is saying, what the verse says? All things to think about. That there's no right answer to. It just kind of depends. Are there multiple languages used? having the choir sing a hymn as an anthem is a great way to introduce more diverse languages to your worship, especially for people who are in sort of a homogenous situation. So like for us, we are primarily white English speakers in my congregation. So this is a great way for us to start to hear other languages and be reminded that there are people who are doing things, speaking things that are differently than us. And then it becomes this way that we can pray together across time and space. So you can use this as, if it's a hymn that the congregation knows, like a lot of congregations know really well, Lord, you have come to the lakeshore. But I have never heard, and this is my experience, so I don't want to say that it doesn't happen, but I have never heard it sung in Spanish in any of the congregations I've been a part of. And that speaks to the congregations I've been a part of. The last time we did it, because I know I've got a Spanish speaker now in my choir, I was really intentional, at least because we did it as a congregational hymn, about making sure that both languages were on there. And her mom was actually in church that day. And I said, sing whatever language you want. And they both sang it in Spanish, and you could hear a little bit of it. And it was just really great. And they really appreciated that gesture of hospitality. And so you can have your choir sing this in another language, let them work on it and learn it, and then maybe have the congregation join the last time through with it in English, or just let them all listen to it in a foreign language. So those are questions to ask, to think about the text when you're putting these things together. Music. Here are things that I think about when I look at music. What does the melody look like? Is it pentatonic? So what's the span of the melody? Because some melodies of these hymns, range a fifth. Some of them range more than an octave. And we want to know that because that's going to change maybe who I'm going to have sing, or how maybe I'll do more parts if the melody is higher. So that way my basses and my altos don't have to sing that high constantly. They can have something else to sing. With things that are pentatonic, I'm a sucker for drones. And that's also part of my singing bell. Singing bell is my favorite thing. I could have it every Sunday in church and it would make me happy. And so I'm thinking about those things, maybe just the choir is going to do a drone, or maybe I'm going to do both the choir and the singing bell, or maybe we're going to do a drone that looks a little bit differently. So we'll look at a couple of those here. So let's look at first Two Fishermen. Let's look at the text. Let's look at the piece first, Brian, and then we'll listen to it. So this piece, it's got that pentatonic melody here. Da, 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 da. And then it has a refrain at the end. On the second page, you see the refrain. And in my hymnal that I was using, and in this one here too, you see that the refrain has parts to it. Whereas the verse along there is just this single line. And I use those as clues. And depending on your hymnal too, will dictate some of those things too, because some hymnals are only going to put one line in no matter what. They will never put parts in, but this one does. This gives us those parts during that refrain. So since I'm seeing these parts during the refrain, and I'm seeing that Jesus is speaking during the refrain, leave all things you have and come and follow me. I'm thinking about that. Jesus isn't speaking during the verses. We're talking about these people, these disciples, starting out with two fishermen that Jesus is calling to come and follow. Okay, even the fourth stanza, and you good Christians, one and all who'd follow Jesus' way. Jesus still isn't talking. So I made the decision to have the refrain sung in parts every single time it came up. So we were going to do the same thing every time to set off the text of Jesus talking. So we know that it's always the same person talking every time. Then the first stanza, I had the basses and tenors sing and then the second stanza I did as a solo. And the third stanza, I had the sopranos and altos sing it. And one of the reasons I had them sing that instead of other stanzas is because we start talking about some of the women in that verse. It doesn't start out that way. Oh, Simon, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, beloved one, you heard Christ's call to speak good news revealed to God's own son. And then we get down, Susanna, Mary, Magdalene, who traveled with your Lord. So now we've got the women speaking. So I wanted to hear them. I wanted the congregation to hear that these women are present too. And then the fourth stanza, we had everybody sing, because now instead of talking about these people, these biblical figures serving Jesus, we're talking about present day, you good Christians, all of you good Christians who come and follow Jesus' way. Don't get mired down, because it said, who are bound by the trappings of our day, and listen as he calls your name to come and follow near. For still he speaks in varied ways to those his call will hear. So calling out to all of us to hear and listen. So that's why I had everybody sing that one, as to make there to be a little stronger statement of talking to everybody. I used drones when I had a single voice part singing. Whoever wasn't singing was oohing underneath. And to support that, I added a singing bell underneath that. I guess I should explain that. For those of you who don't know what the singing bell is, you get a dowel rod. I should have brought a handbell home with me. You get a dowel rod and you put it on the side of the handbell and you just move it in a circle and it creates the vibration. And as long as you're moving the dowel rod against the bell, it keeps on going. I also have a friend who's been singing with my virtual choir who plays alto flute, and I wanted a little bit of different sound. So she does some alto flute along with this as well. So I'll let you take a listen to Two Fishermen. Oh,
Singing bell.
Singing bell.
All right, here's Two Fishermen.
As he walked along the shore, 'twas James and John he'd find, and those two sons of Zebedee would leave their boats behind. Their work and all they held so dear, they left beside their nets. Their names they'd heard as Jesus called, they came without regret. Leave all things to heaven, come and follow me, and come and follow me. O Simon,
So there's an example of how that would sound all together. I'd forgotten, I didn't make a note on here. I'd forgotten that I played, there was a piano accompaniment that I played added on that last stanza again to kind of highlight this calling everybody together to respond to this biblical witness of leaving these things behind and going and following Jesus. Another way to use these ostinato things, which I didn't say this was number 2, but number 2 is, does the melody lend itself to an ostinato? And they kind of work together with this pentatonic thing, is "Oh Love, How Deep." I took this out of this Alice Parker book, and she uses a different text in here. I don't remember which one it is, but she uses a different text, but with the same melody. But the ideas work the same. And so she has a suggestion with using, and sometimes like you heard with the 2 fishermen, the ostinato that the choir sang was just an oo. It's just on a neutral oo syllable, and you can do that. But then you can also do things like adding text. So what you're going to hear with "Oh Love, How Deep" is she takes the name of the melody, the tune, "Deo Gratias," and we repeat that, and it works with the text as well. And there's 2 different ones. I'll show you here. I should have sent this to Brian too. And so we get the basses have their own, the tenors and basses have their own, and the sopranos and altos, which is this bottom line, have their own for when you want to utilize them with different stanzas. And so what you're going to hear here with this is everybody sings together the first stanza. You want to show us that hymn text, Brian? Okay, because again, these I'm working in really simultaneously with music and with text. So when we look at the text here, the first stanza, "Oh love, how deep, how broad, how high, it fills the heart with ecstasy, that God the Son of God should take our mortal form for mortal's sake." So we're introducing what we're going to be talking about here, who we're talking about, and why it's kind of important. So then 2, 3, 4, and 5, they all start out the same way. For us. For us, Jesus did X. For us, baptized. For us, he prayed. For us, to evil powers betrayed. For us, he rose from death again. So when I'm thinking about what I want to do, I want to do something that's going to highlight the fact that we've got for us, for us, for us. Then the last stanza is a doxology. All glory to our Lord and God. For love so deep, so high, so broad. So you can hear that parallel with the first stanza of bringing that text back. So what I did is we have everybody singing together for the first stanza, just straight through melody, nothing complicated, to introduce with this idea of what we're going to be talking about. Then for stanzas 2 and 3, the high voices, sopranos and altos, are singing the melody, and the low voices, basses and tenors, are doing the drone. And then for 4 and 5, they switch. So then we can still keep hearing what's happening in the text, keeping our brains also engaged. I mean, because part of singing hymns is to sing praise to God, but it's also to be formed and shaped ourselves. And like anything, when things are the same thing, our brains stop. Again, this is that enabling worship. And also there's some discipleship going on that I didn't really talk about so much, but that's also happening here. And then for our doxology, we're going to sing it in a canon at 2 parts. So Brian's got audio that we can listen to this.
How deep, how broad, how high, it fills the heart with ecstasy, that God should take our mortal form for mortal's sake. Deo gratias.
For us to evil public tread, scourge not in the parade. He bore the shameful cross and death, for us gave up his dying breath. For us he rose from death again, for us he went on high to heaven. For us he sent his Spirit here, to guide, to strengthen, and to cheer. All glory to our Lord and God, for love so deep, so high, so broad, the Trinity we adore, forever and
Yeah, so I did it this way because I like the quicker rhythm of the women's, the soprano alto ostinato with that fourth stanza, with the betrayal of Jesus, to the death of Jesus, to the rising, because that part of the story moves. It's got a lot quicker motion. You can make a different argument about flipping them. And I like doing the canon on the last stanza because it sort of represents this continual singing of praises to Jesus that will happen for all of eternity, instead of it just sort of being this unison kind of thing. Can the melody be sung in a canon? And so you kind of hear some of it with that one. The next one we're going to look at is Lord Who Throughout These 40 Days, which is another one that I use this canon idea with. And I use a canon and a tag all on this one to kind of help wrap it all up at the end. This is a simpler one. Then like Oh Love How Deep is a much more complicated one than Lord Who Throughout These 40 Days. And so I start off having the choir all in unison. Because it's an introduction. A lot of times, especially with these longer hymn texts, a lot of times that first stanza, like it's your introduction to your paper. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Jesus being in the desert for 40 days and what Jesus experienced in the desert for 40 days. And so how can we highlight that? And so all together in unison, high voices for stanza 2, low voices for stanza 3, because we're talking about some more of those specific things that Jesus is experiencing in the desert. Then stanza 4, I have everybody sing again, because we're kind of changing now who's really experiencing the action. Instead of talking about how Jesus interacted with Satan and conquered sin, and how hungry and thirsty that Jesus was, and Jesus showing us that we need more than water and bread to live on, but need to the whole word of God. That then now we talk about how we are going to respond specifically through this season of Lent, because this is a Lenten hymn, and through these days of penitence, and through thy passion tide, yet evermore in life and death, Jesus with us abide. So now we want it to be this whole group of people singing. And I just have them doing this one in unison as a simpler version. We could have it sung in parts if you wanted to. There's nothing wrong with that. Then this last stanza is this futuristic looking. I love singing this text on the first Sunday of Lent because it reminds us why we're in the season of Lent, but it also gives us this hope to look forward to the future. Abide with us that so this life of suffering overpast, an Easter of an ending joy we may attain at last. So we know we got to go through this. We know we got to suffer. We know we got to say our penance. We got to do these things. So that way we can experience joy. And there's something about doing the canon on the last one that helps make it joy filled. And then I add a little tag at the end of repeating an Easter of an ending joy to kind of bring it back and give us a little bit of a center there. So we'll give a listen to this because I do have a recording of this one as well.
Lord, do throughout these 40 days for us steadfast and pray. Teach us with thee to mourn our sins and close by thee to stand. As thou wast and didst contend, and didst the victory win, oh, give us strength in thee to fight, in thee to conquer sin. As thou didst hunger, bear, and thirst, so teach us, gracious Lord, to die to self and chiefly live by thy most holy word. And through these days of penitence, and through thy passion tide, yea, evermore in life and death, Jesus with us abide. Abide with us, that so this life of suffering overpast, an Easter of unending joy we may attain at last. An Easter of unending joy we may attain at last.
That's what that one kind of sounds like. That one went together a lot faster, and that's one that we sing often for a cappella Sunday, actually with the whole congregation like that, as one of the hymns that they sing that first Sunday. And as you've heard too on these pieces, I hope you've heard where like Theo Love How Deep was all a cappella. It was just the voices, which was a little less intimidating for them because my choir, several of my choir have helped me out put some of these together, and we did them virtually right now, but I would do that with them a cappella if we were in person. But then like the Lord who throughout these 40 days added a little bit of organ accompaniment, and it's just you can change all this so much. Okay, continuing on to the next questions, what we look for with music. Are there parts in my hymnal that the choir can easily sing? Like I had said before, some hymnals have choir parts. Some hymnals have choir parts for everything that might not be appropriate. Some hymnals don't have choir parts for anything. So kind of look at that and see. I know several of you said that you use multiple hymnals. So consult multiple hymnals. If you're not happy with what like your choir has in their choir loft, see what other hymnals have and see if it's something that is going to fit what your kind of idea or what you're thinking is better, or maybe give you a different idea. Is there a refrain? Just like the text. I mean, if there's a refrain on the text, there's really probably going to be a refrain in the music as well. Sometimes though, you can see how the music repeats itself, because sometimes the music might repeat itself where the text doesn't. Where are the musical phrases and how do they align with the text? Good hymns, that the musical phrases and the text phrases are going to line up really great. Or sometimes maybe you want to put a text with a different tune than what it's printed with, and thinking about how those work together to make sure that everything lines up nicely. Okay, so there's two other hymns I think we've got that I haven't talked about yet. Yes. Lift High the Cross. I got a recording of this one. This is another one like the Lord who throughout these 40 days that is a simpler one. When you look at it in the United Methodist hymnal, it gives you some ideas already here on the page, and we used these ideas. So refrain, it tells you unison up there. It doesn't want you singing these parts because they're really not meant to be choral parts. And so every time the refrain came, we sang it as in unison. And then for the verses, we did everybody in unison on the first one, high voices on the second one, low voices on the third one, and then part SATB on the last one, on the final stanza. And that's just because it starts out, so shall our song of triumph ever be. So it's basically saying, because of these things that we've talked about in the first three stanzas, we're gonna wrap it all up. Because of that, we want to continue to sing praises to God. So we'll give this a listen. This is the last recording I've got, so we'll let Brian play that one for you.
Till all the world adore.
Thank you, Brian. So all of these recordings you've heard it's my choir. 2 of them are anthems that we've used recently. 2 of them are pieces where I said to them, hey, I love you. You guys love me, right? You want to help me out with this? And several of them went above and beyond. So there's just a couple people who are singing there. One of my friends or 2 of my friends who are singing with us who are professional musicians. But the majority of them are your average amateur church choir member. So they can do these things. It's nothing crazy. So we'll look at one more hymn, and then we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A if you have any questions. So we're gonna look at "Oh Freedom" as one kind of last technique that you can use here. You can do things based on voice part. And this depends on how many people you've got singing in your choir or whatnot. With this one, you can start in by having the basses go first and sing their bass line. And then after they've gone all the way through like the first section or the whole piece, you could depend on how you would want to do it. With this one, I'd probably do it by section, just because it could get really long. Let the basses sing their part all the way through, then add the tenors for a repetition, and then add the altos for a repetition, and then add the sopranos, and then you've got everybody in and can keep singing it all the way through. And then at the end, you could just stop the piece when you decided it was the end, or you could do the reverse and have them back out the way they came in. So sopranos out first, repeat it just A, T, B, then repeat it T, B, then repeat just the basses and in it that way is an option you could do, especially with something like this. This freedom song would lend itself really nicely to that. Not everything is going to lend itself to that. And just a couple other techniques that Alice Parker talks about in her book to just have them in your brain. You can change voice parts. So like you could have the soprano sing the melody and then have the alto sing the bass line in their respective octave. You could have the basses sing the bass line and have the tenor sing the melody in their respective octave. You could also do things like one voice part sing a part of the melody and the other voice part sing a part of the melody. You heard a little bit of interludes with the Deo Gratias ostinato, but you could add some of those in. So those are just a few other ideas that I didn't have specific examples, but you can think about. So, questions?
So the one question that's come in is from Ruth Anderson, and she says, "What have you found is the most effective way to get your plan across to the choir? Is it verbal, written on a copy of the hymn as it is found in the hymnal, or rewritten using a music writing program?"
I don't rewrite anything. That I can tell you to start off with. I have found the easiest way is to give them an instruction sheet. And so, let me see. You want to stop sharing your screen for a minute, Brian? Yeah, let me see. I should be able to find this. I can show you. Okay. So here is the carol instruction sheet that I've got started for them for our lessons in carol service that we're doing. And so like an instruction sheet like this, we're all right, stanza 1, all unison, all in parts. This is a little simpler because the congregation is going to sing these things along with us. But that I have found is the easiest. And what I do when we're in person rehearsal is I'll give them that sheet that says, here are your instructions for this hymn. And then I encourage them to then write directly in their hymnal with a pencil. And I always specify with a pencil, because sometimes I change my mind, either in that rehearsal for that piece because something's not gelling, or maybe down the road we're going to do the piece again and we want to do something a little bit different. But I found that if they're the ones that transfer it into their hymnal, they're using markings that make sense to them. And so we verbally talk through the sheet as they write it in their hymnal.
Megan, thank you so much for this webinar. As you were talking things through, my mind was just racing with ideas and, oh yeah, that would work. And it was really, really wonderful. And Ruth says, thank you for answering her question. I want to mention a couple of things that are coming up. For those of you who are watching, tomorrow, the Hymn Society is having our regular Tuesday gathering. These are informal gatherings in a meeting, a Zoom meeting type atmosphere where we get to chat and talk with each other. We'll be led tomorrow by our president-elect, Hillary Donaldson. On Thursday is the first of the Hymn Society's webinar series, We Will Sing, and that's with Michael Hahn. There's still time to register for that. You can check it out on the Hymn Society's website. And on Election Day, I'll pop up here. On Election Day, the Center for Congregational Song is doing a 12-hour-long broadcast that is specifically not about voting or the election. The assumption is that you will have already voted, and from 1 p.m. Eastern to 1 a.m. Eastern on Election Day, we will broadcast hymns and songs that will help us lament, that will help us turn towards God and find a sense of peace and calm, because it's going to be an anxious day for everyone. And so we want to be a voice for quiet and fearlessness and reliance on God. And so I invite you to check that out on the center's website, and we'll be advertising that as well. And so finally, just want to say once again, thank you so much, Megan, for doing this webinar today. And we'll see who's next. Next month is maybe Slats?
Maybe?
I can't remember. I should know this. I'm in charge. But it's going to be someone great because all of our ambassadors are wonderful. And so I hope you'll check it out next month when we'll be back with our next webinar.
Great. Thank you.